Thank you, David and Lauren, and I'm very pleased to be here. And let me thank IDRC colleagues for inviting me to this lecture series and supporting me in the preparation process. I feel very humbled to talk about the issue of international aid at IDRC, since IDRC is such a unique Canadian institution that is so well known in doing international aid work. Yet I also feel quite at home to talk about the issue in Canada. Since the country of Canada was linked to internationalism, the first time I heard about Canada more than 40 years ago when I was a primary school student. At the time, actually, we had to read the three classical Chinese classical writings of Chairman Mao Zedong, and one of which was in memory of Norman Bassoon. So for some of you might know that Dr. Bassoon is a was a Canadian medical doctor who went to China in the late 1930s to provide medical aid to China's anti-Japanese war. The spirit of internationalism exemplified by Dr. Bassoon has been an inspiration for generations of people in the international aid area in China. However, in a complex environment today, international aid activities may not always bring appreciation or praise. It can even bring controversies and criticism. And this is the case of China's aid to Africa. While China's aid to Africa has been praised for its focus on tangible and practical outcomes, they have also been criticized for not paying enough attention to issues such as corruption, environmental standards, and so on. No matter what the reasons are behind this criticism, they do indicate fault lines that, left unchecked, may reduce the effectiveness of China's aid and hurt the long-term benefits that Africa can receive from such aid. As an academic, our first self-perpetuating solution is to do more research. And that's exactly what I did. And in fact, that in the last 2 years, I've been sort of working on this issue a bit in the spare time I have, in addition to serving as a dean. So the following lecture, I think, remarks are partially based on my own research, but also drawn from a much larger literature, including a recent special issue on China and Africa in the Journal of the China Quarterly, and also the book The Dragon's Gift by Deborah Brottingham. In the remaining time of my talk, I will first provide a review of China's foreign aid with a special focus on Africa. Then I'll try to put China's recent engagement with Africa in perspective. I'll end my talk with some suggestions on how to reduce misunderstandings and enhance collaborations between Chinese aid community and their international colleagues. China actually started providing foreign aid almost immediately after the founding of People's Republic of China in 1949. The first aid request to China was in July 1950, when Mongolia's prime minister asked China to provide labor support. So I don't know whether that request still stands, because China can still provide a lot more labor now. By the year 2008, China has provided foreign aid to over 160 countries around the world. This aid program includes projects. China has completed over 2,000 projects in infrastructure and turnkey projects in industry, agriculture, transportation, telecommunication, education, health, and many other areas. And also China has worked on the people front. China has sent many technical experts to provide technical assistance, and also dispatched over 20,000 medical professionals to over 60 countries and regions. And also provided training and exchange opportunities to close to 100,000 technical and managerial people and government officials. In fact, our school of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University, we currently run an international MPA program, which actually provides educational opportunities for mid-career government officials from African and Asian developing countries. China has also provided money, many sort of in-kind support and some cash support requested by the recipient countries to over 100 countries, and had provided concessionary loans to over 60 countries. By the end of 2007, China signed agreements with 49 countries in different parts of the world to waive debts. Now, let me see how this works. By the way, I prepared my talk originally totally in PowerPoints, but now we are going to, I'm told that it's probably better to not to, okay, great, okay. So this figure 1 really shows the China's foreign aid outlay and its percentage as a government expenditure from early 1950s to 2007. The unit is 100 million RMB. As you can see that China's foreign aid has fluctuated, since the 1950s, but in recent years has been growing very fast. Now, I think by in 2007, it has reached a historical high of 10.7 billion Chinese yuan. Now, let's focus on the aid to Africa. Official relationship with African countries did not start until 1956, when China established diplomatic relations with Egypt and came to Egypt's assistance during the Suez crisis by providing a 5 million loan and sending volunteers. Over the half-century since then, China's engagement with African countries has made major progress. Since late 1990s, the scale of China's partnership with Africa has greatly expanded and has involved a network of trade, aid, and investment with over 50 African countries. China has also largely eliminated tariff on exports for 29 least developed African countries and has become a source of foreign direct investment to Africa. As of 2006, China's existing loans and credit lines to Africa are estimated at about 19 billion US dollars. And I think most of this assistance are in various kinds of projects in social infrastructure and also in some economic projects, and also in knowledge sharing and the scholarship programs and so on. So in fact, this graph shows the kind of projects that China is running with Africa. As you can see, that the largest sector is science, education, culture, public health, and sports. So that's all been lumped in so one big category, and the other is the agriculture, forestry, animal, and fishery, and so on. So it's a very diverse group of projects. A survey of literature in terms of looking at China's aid will find that there are 3 features of China's aid practice to Africa really stand out. The first one is practical orientation. China's aid to Africa has had a very strong orientation, a practical orientation from the start. The specific content of the aid was very much driven by the demand of African countries and by what China could offer. The practical orientation meant that China's foreign aid in Africa in general is not driven by any sort of conceptual model of development, nor has China made much effort in generating such a model. In fact, many high-level Chinese government officials often remind their counterparts in Africa that they have to find their own way in developing their economy when they visit China. The government agencies involved in foreign aid does not have a fixed model on how foreign aid should be done, and rely heavily on their practical experience in China. They are much more flexible and willing to accommodate the specific needs of the recipient countries. The second feature is consistent principles. A major feature of China's foreign aid practice is that the general principle that guided China's aid to Africa has endured the test of time. At the general level, the core principles are equal treatment, a respect for sovereignty, non-interference, mutual benefits, and co-development. Here, the most controversial one is the non-interference, the principle of non-interference. For many Western countries, international aid is an effective tool to force African countries to move towards good governance and democracy, in addition to some other conditions such as environmental issues that are often attached to the aid. China's refusal to impose political conditions in its foreign aid has been seen as a threat to the effectiveness of these tools. I think it should be clear that it is not China's intention to undermine Western donors' aid strategy, despite fundamental differences between China's aid policy and that of the Western donors in this regard. I think there are two main reasons why China will not attach political conditions in China's aid to Africa. First of all, China and African countries all suffered the humiliation and pain of the colonial period in their history. It is natural that China and Africa treasure the basic principle that every country is equal and no country has the right to infringe the sovereignty affairs of the others. The second reason why China insists on not attaching any political conditions in foreign aid relates to the approach of Chinese diplomacy. As a developing country, China understands very well the kind of daunting and complex challenges that African countries are facing. It believes that no other countries than themselves know better how to address these challenges. In cases where there are humanitarian crises or other serious wrongdoings, China often relying on the judgment of legitimate regional or international organizations and join international efforts in addressing these issues. In this situation, China always advocates for peaceful and respectful approach instead of threatening and coercive approach. While China may provide friendly advice or constructive suggestions, the ultimate decision resides in the hands of the concerned country. The third feature is a high-level engagement. In international relations, summit diplomacy can often play unique roles in building the trust and generate breakthroughs. Analysts have noticed that major meetings or summit diplomacy between Chinese and African leaders can be critical to establish direct communication at the highest level of government, set the tones of relationship and bilateral policies, and create mutual trust and respect between heads of states. For almost 20 years since 1991, Africa has been the destination of China's foreign ministry's first foreign visit. Major policy changes and aid projects are often announced during these high-level visits. These unique features of China's aid have played an important role in helping China's foreign aid work. However, as Africa development has been ascending rapidly as a global agenda issue, the landscape of international aid to Africa has also changed. Further, the political and economic environments in African countries have also experienced fundamental change. The practice and principles that have worked well during the past half-century may also have to change to meet the new challenges. In summary, China's aid to Africa started over 40 years ago and covered a wide range of areas and countries. In fact, China has provided aid to every country in sub-Saharan Africa country that followed the One China policy. So this is very different from the charts made by some media and some even public organizations saying that China's aid is all about oil, mineral, and resources. Actually, the most recent book by Deborah Brettingham's book she has a more systematic analysis on these issues. The reason why China's aid to Africa has generated many controversies, in my own opinion, is due to two reasons. One is the rapid growth in the scale of the aid, and the other is the confusion of aid with broader engagement between China and Africa. So in the following discussion, I'd like to go beyond aid, but also to examine China's cooperation with Africa in terms of trade and FDI. In particular, I'd like to take two angles. One is from China's cooperation with other regions of the world in comparison with that of Africa. And the other then is from Africans' cooperation with other regions of the world in comparison with China. So let's look at some of the feed. First of all, let's look at the trade. I think actually trade between China and Africa has been growing very fast, rising from 10.6 billion in the year 2000 to 106.8 billion in 2008. So this is quite impressive, very rapid growth. However, if you put that in the context of China's overall trade with other trading partners, you see there's nothing unusual about China's trade with Africa. As you can see that the most rapid growth is more with the Asia. So the orange line is the Asia and Pacific. So that's the line. The line is this is Asia and Pacific. And this line is, let me see, this line is this is North America. This is mostly the US and Canada. And this blue line is Europe. So actually, this is Latin America, and this is Africa. So the growth rate, even though it's quite high, but again, when you compare to all this trade growth, it's nothing special. Now, looking from the African angle, and we can also see that if we look at who are the major trading partners of African countries, here European countries are the major trading partners of Africa, and USA is so if you look at the groups and the second group, and this is China. China indeed has been growing quite fast, but still I think no comparison. Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay. So in terms of the growth rate, it's in parallel to that of the US, and this is Japan. So you can see that from Africa's point of view, European countries are still the most important trading partners, and China lags behind that of the US and, of course, the European countries. Now let's look at FDI. China's FDI outflow to Africa has also indeed been growing very fast, particularly in the recent years. As you can see that it's up until the year 2003, it's very slow, and then started to pick up, and 2007, 2008 is just tremendous growth. But if you look at again, when we look at the overall FDI to different regions of the world, and we can see that, again, the blue bar is the total. This is total. And the red bar is Asia. And this is Africa. Right? So, and of course, this is Europe, and the North America is here. So again, you see that the tremendous activities are still somewhat within the Asia Pacific. So Africa, while if you look at the previous graph, it's indeed quite dramatic growth. But if you look at the comparative to other regions, it's still quite normal. If we look at from Africa's perspective, the continent of Africa as a whole only gets a very small share of the global FDI, despite the recent surge. In the year 2005, FDI in Africa was 31 billion US dollars, about 3% of the global total of over 900 billion. And the most important investors in Africa are from France, the Netherlands, UK, South Africa, and the US, whose combined investment accounted for more than half of the region's FDI inflows. China actually trailed Singapore, India, or Malaysia in FDI in Africa in this account up until the year 2005, in the early 2000s. Now, the most recent rapid increase in the last few years makes it possible for China to become a significant investor in Africa in the years to come. While major deals by China's state-owned enterprises, such as CNPC and Sinopec, are indeed in resource extraction sectors, and that often gets the limelight. But China's engagement with Africa has also been propelled by many private enterprises in a much broader set of industries. Among the 800+ Chinese enterprises investing in Africa, only about 100 are state-owned. In addition, China's FDI covers a wide range of industries, including agriculture, manufacturing, service, and others. Now, I think the aid, I've already talked about that previously, and so it's clear that China's aid to Africa occupies a very central place in China's overall international aid umbrella. At the same time, China's aid is only a very small fraction of the global total of 40 billion. So in fact, even though from China's own perspective, indeed, aid to Africa, I think depending on different estimates, my own estimates is about half of China's overall aid to foreign countries went to Africa in the last few years. But again, I think that from Africans' point of view, China's aid is only a very small fraction of the total aid African countries receives. China's engagement with Africa has been growing fast in all fronts, as we've seen, including trade, FDI, and development aid. The driving force behind this growth is much more diffuse and complex than a concerted strategy to get Africa's energy and natural resources. It is a confluence of a number of factors, including China's government policy to promote outward economic engagement, growing Chinese and African markets for each other's exports, Africa's demand for infrastructure, and China's unique approach to financing. The engagement is much more decentralized and broad-based than the occasional news stories depict. They're clearly commercial rather than aid-driven, and the private sector has really stepped up to the center stage, which also indeed actually presented some interesting challenges. Overall, China's engagement with Africa has generated a positive impact on the economic development and the development dynamics in the African continent. By now, my message is quite clear. First of all, China's engagement with Africa, despite the noises and attention, is not that unusual when you put in the general context of China's overall engagement with other parts of the world. In particular, China's aid to Africa, when compared with those of traditional donors, is still quite small. Second, such engagement, despite all the charges and accusations, have generated benefits to African people. The simple fact that China in Africa has become such a major issue of contention and even become a line of research is quite telling. It really shows how deep the mistrust toward China has run. So now let me turn to the Chinese aid community, the Western aid community, and the various African stakeholders in the development process to see what are the challenges and how to turn this challenge into opportunities. The first challenge really goes to the Chinese aid community. I think after so many years of providing aid, China needs a better articulation of China's development model and to reflect on the strengths and also limitations in applying such model in a different social and cultural context. For many people in Africa, China's approach to development offers a new alternative that they find fresh and more applicable. The real impact of China in Africa may well be that it provides a successful example that people think they can emulate. It has greatly enhanced the self-confidence of the people in Africa. However, without clear articulation of the conceptual model, but relying on simple replication of domestic business practice, also runs high risk. Some analysts observe that Chinese managerial narratives of hard work, self-reliance, getting ahead, delayed gratification, and sacrifice may be with African counter-narratives of exploitation, arrogance, and insensitivity. It is ironic that while China and Africa has been hot research field outside China in the West, there are still very limited studies in China in this area. There's a need for a coherent understanding of how China's aid to Africa has worked or not worked, how China's aid is different from that of existing donors, and to what degree China's aid to Africa is competitive or complementary to that of existing donors, and in what ways China's development assistance model can enrich our understanding of the development process in general. So I think there's a lot of things that China, the aid community in China, really ought to reflect and to think about how China's aid can be improved. At the same time, the challenge also goes to the traditional donors. Can they be more tolerant and open-minded to new approaches to development aid? Instead of using the existing and comforting yardsticks to measure the new development approach and criticize them for not measuring up to standards, the traditional donor may also need to be less orthodoxy, but be more flexible in studying the new aid approach and engaging with the new players. For example, China has been blamed for not being transparent in providing aid data. And in fact, myself have also, indeed in my research in trying to dig out and to estimate what is the total aid to Africa. But what I found is that the mode of China's aid is so different from that of the traditional donors. There's no simple way just to convert one set of data to another. So indeed, there is not a simple solution to the problem. What I learned is that I think there was a South African study that has indeed discussed with the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, the Foreign Aid Department, and trying to see whether there's a way to convert that data. And so now there's some study that's been done. But that illustrates the kind of differences that now that we see, and hopefully that indeed, instead of really converting everything into one simple frame, but maybe there could be alternative ways of providing aid, and also in terms of trying different things. Last but not least, the opportunity really goes to people in Africa, to the traditional donors and to the Chinese aid community. If the three parties can learn from each other and work together, many experiences can be shared. For example, the traditional donor can tell their Chinese colleagues what the mistakes they are making when they interpret African realities from their own particular frames of experience, and are at best ineffectual and at worst the cause of grave damage. At the same time, the African colleagues can also play a more active role in shaping the discourse on China's engagement with Africa. There is probably a symmetric lack of knowledge in Africa about China and the lack of knowledge in China about Africa. Given Western donors' experience in both China and Africa, they can certainly play a more constructive role in bridging the gaps. Ultimately, this exchange and collaborations can generate benefits for not only people in Africa, but also people in China and in the West, and contribute to a more peaceful and prosperous world. Thank you.
Well, I think you can see, ladies and gentlemen, why we asked Xue Lan to come and speak to us on this topic. When we bring people in for our Speakers of Renown series at IDRC, we try to bring in people who are going to say things that you won't necessarily hear every day or read every day in the newspapers. So I think you've had a good dose of that unusualness this afternoon. I'm going to hand the floor over to you folks who are present in the room here right now. As you can see, we have two microphones, one on the left and one on the right. Could you please, when you make your comment or make your question, can you identify yourself and the institution that you come from? Can you please be relatively concise in your remarks? I'm sure we'll have an awful lot of people. You see the eager beavers are already at the microphones, and there's more people headed to the mics as we speak. So I'm going to ask people to be brief. I'll group 2 or 3 questions together so that Lan can answer in that way. Things will move along very well. Si vous voulez poser vos questions.
If you wish to ask your question in French, please do not hesitate. I will interpret for our speaker, and there is simultaneous interpretation that is offered. There are headsets that you can use if you so wish.
From the left-hand microphone and then the right-hand microphone. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lan, for this most enlightening expose you've given us. I assume that you have calculated the aid of China to Africa, which goes through multilateral organizations in these figures. And if you didn't, can you tell us the ratio of China's aid to Africa, which goes through the World Bank and the African Development Bank, let's say? I have a small case that I would like to bring to your attention about in Africa while I was at the African Development Bank in the early 80s, which involved China, actually. Although China was not a member of the bank at that time, but we had a very unique case when Rwanda's Minister of Finance, not at that time, came to us in Abidjan and told us, look, you have given us a loan for a road. I think it was about 12 million units of account. And we have an offer from Chinese firms to do that job for 25% of that cost. And we'd like you to give us that money so as we can do it with the Chinese. And the bank said, the board said, no, China is not a member of the bank. And as any club of this sort, we cannot. Yet, we have succeeded, some of us, to oppose this vote of the board, and we took it back to the governors, and finally, the governors accepted that, on one condition, that it would not be a precedent. This is what I want to get to your attention. Afterwards, China joined the bank, of course. So my question is, what's the ratio of the aid goes multilaterally? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Could you identify yourself,
Moderator?
please?
You say identify and keep it short. So first, I identify myself, Oscar Boloko. I am the Vice President of the African Diaspora in Canada. And my question, I will keep it short. I appreciate the presentation of Professor Lan. But when we come in this kind of conference, I would like to be very pragmatical, very go to the depths of the things. I am Canadian from Africa. My origin takes place from the Democratic Republic of Congo. When you say Democratic Republic of Congo, right away you can imagine the impact of the new relationship between DRC, democratic by the name, by the way, and the business of Chinese in the Congo. It is, for me, as a person from Congolese origin, I think we have to say it clear that China's relationship with Africa, and particularly with the DRC, is not working for peace. It's working for war. I have family there. I talk with them, and I follow day by day what is going there. China recently has signed agreements, and with many African countries. Apart from them is the DRC. China, according to my research, I don't know what you get your inputs, but for me, China has become the second largest business country in Africa after the United States. That's my research. And China is picking all the natural resources in Africa and especially in DRC. In the contrary, nothing, if few, has been done. You know the contract about the mining in Katanga, that's southern of DRC. China has signed a deal of 6 million, I think, 6 billion, and is requesting to get from DRC something like 30 billion of the mining. And the people of Congo, they're dying. They are victims of this kind of business. And to finish, you know the war going on in the eastern part of Congo. We're talking about 6 or 5 million people killed so far with arms, illegal arms. And some of those arms come from right away from China. Is that the right way to do business for peace? Give me the answer. Thank you.
Right, Lan, over to you.
Okay, I think, first of all, thanks for all the questions. First of all, let me, in terms of aid to these figures, in terms of whether these are to the countries and in terms of multilateral organizations, I think that this figure do not include data to, money to multilateral organizations such as World Bank and so on, but may include money to regional organizations in Africa. So if there's any support to regional organizations in Africa, I think that should be in here. But most of the data, I think the data are to individual countries. But I don't have a clear account of what money goes to say African Development Bank or I think that should be in here. But to the World Bank probably should not be probably will not be in here. But there's it's an aggregated data, but we can't differentiate the specifics. Yeah, and I think that the second issue is about the Democratic of Congo. I think first of all, I think that you mentioned about China is the second largest business country in Africa. I don't know where you get your data, but all the data I have here, I got from the public sources, either from the UN data or from the World Bank. So I think what I presented here indeed can be substantiated. The second thing about the Democratic Congo, indeed China has a project in Democratic Congo. I think the nature of the business is that China is building some infrastructure and using the mines as a guarantee. I think we have to be clear that it's really using the mines as a guarantee. In fact, so it's not not as a direct payment, but of course I think that indeed part of that is used as payment. I think whether that's a fair deal or it's not, I think it is up to people in the business sector to judge, and I think there are some analysts who will indeed find this actually quite an innovative way to structure the financing of those infrastructure which are critical for economic development for Democratic Congo and many other countries. And in terms of arms sales, and I think that you need to have more substantive evidence. And I'm sure that if you do have that, indeed, if it's illegal, certainly I think the government will try its best to prevent that from happening. Now, I think that resource is indeed one thing that people have argued a lot, saying that China's investment, China's engagement with Africa is about resources. I think that, first of all, let's look at the China's import from Africa. Indeed, very high percentage of that is on oil, minerals, or resource related. About 75% of that from Africa is indeed on those resources. But if you look at, again, if you look at from an overall exports of Africa to the rest of the world, 76%, about 76% of Africans' export to the world indeed is concentrated in those areas. So China's imports from Africa is not much different from other countries' imports from Africa. In fact, it's literally 2 days ago, I was at an occasion that the China Development Forum, China's president of Exim Bank, he said some African colleagues told him that for the first time since actually because of China's engagement with Africa, the African minerals can really sell at the market price. They can get the real benefits out of it. So I think that if you think that's a problem, that maybe I think you can talk with the people who are really in the economic sectors and to see whether that's the case or not.
Okay, we have a couple more. Madame.
Thank you very much. My name is Stella, University of Ottawa. I have a quick comment to make. This has been a very, interesting perspective on China and Africa, and I think it comes at the right time when minds are really trying hard to understand what's going on between Africa and China. And it's also remarkable that you acknowledge the fact that it's very important for China to know Africa and also for Africa to know China, which is a very, very crucial thing. And to me, it sets a base for understanding between two different organizations that would like to work with each other. So, and the last quick comment is that he also noted the kind of approach, traditional donors, Africa and also China. And the fact that we'd like to see discourse here shaping practice and at the same time practice shaping discourse is quite remarkable. And I so wish my African colleagues, those that are here, will definitely take this and try to work hard with our different governments. The only comment that I'll make, which is very commonly used across board, and I think to some extent maybe it's not taken seriously, is the fact that as long as international organizations still treat Africa, I don't know whether to say as a country or what, yet we know it's a continent, that's going to be a problem for long. There's no way that you can solve. I'm African. I know very well what's going on the ground. It's quite difficult to solve African problems if you approach it as one. This is why sometimes debates become so lengthy, because now I'll become Botswana, I'll become South Africa, the other one will say, yes, here I am, I'm Congo. It doesn't really work. Until Africa itself comes to a point where we can know that our regions or our regional organizations, they work to the best. And that is entirely on Africans themselves and our governments. And there's no way that we can always be waiting on the sideway to wait for someone to be our advocate. It lies on us. And I think it's high time. We know very well what causes the controversy here. It's between the two, the West and China. And there's no need for that controversy because the two are so concerned to work together, to make it work. But if Africa itself is waiting on the wayside, I tell you, it's going to take us another maybe 50 years. So I'm hopeful that the coming generation of leaders will definitely make it work. So for me, all that I want to see is, let's see the African discourse, let's see the entire international platform working to inform practice. And let's see that practice as well, turning a hand to inform the discourse that comes out of the organizations. That's all I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Nedson Nzoa. I'm the Deputy High Commissioner at the Zambian High Commission. I would like to start by thanking the presenter. I think your presentation, though I came a bit late, I'd grasped a lot. As you saw me, I was busy scribbling a lot of things that you were saying. But I think the most important thing for us to understand is that we, as Africans, have been caught up in a propaganda. The West versus China. Most of these debates we are having, Africa is just a sacrificial lamb. There's a lot of misinformation that is going around the world. I'm only 3 years here, old in Canada, as we call it here, 3 winters old. I've heard a lot of lies, misinformation, fabrications, things which do not exist in Africa. Just to agree with my sister who spoke before me, Africa is very big. There are 53 countries in Africa. And yet we are everyone keeps on grouping us, calling us Africa. We are different countries with different problems. That's why you find out of 53 countries, if 3 countries are undergoing wars or civil strife, it's the whole Africa is being branded as unsuitable for investment. This is because we are casualties of this misinformation and propaganda that has been going on for a long time. And I would like us to be left alone when it comes to this propaganda, because we don't have the capacity to fight back or to correct the situation. All we have is to watch what we are given on TV, and sometimes we are made to stomach most of the misinformation. Secondly is that from a Zambian perspective, and probably from the southern part of Africa where I come from, I think China has done a lot of good than harm. A lot of good than harm. Zambia is predominantly a mining country. And we are one of the largest, if not the largest, copper-producing country in Africa. All the mines that we had in Zambia, for those who are familiar with Zambia, I come from Copper Belt province, where all the mines are. All the mines were owned by the West. But eventually, the mines were abandoned. And our economy started collapsing. And what happened? China came in, and what they bought, the mine that China is running now, was not owned by anybody. It was abandoned. And we want to make use of our natural resource. We want somebody to come in and partner with us. Right now, our mines are doing very well. But for your the largest mine we have, the mining project called the Lumwana project, which is the largest single mining investment in Africa, is owned by Canadians, not China. And money in excess of $3 billion was raised at the Toronto Stock Exchange. So I don't know why we are not talking about others. China becomes a problem. The second, that mine is owned by Equinox. For those who want to Google, you can Google Equinox and you find the Lumwana project. All the information is there. The second largest mining company we have is not owned by China. What is owned by First Quantum, which is predominantly Australian, if I'm not mistaken. I beg to be corrected there. But what I know for sure is not Chinese. And then there is NFC, which is Chinese, which is Chambishi Metals, which is a small mining company. Recently on BBC, there was a documentary about how China has taken over Zambian mining industry. It was very appalling to watch, because the largest mines are not owned by Chinese. They are owned by other investors. And yet that documentary on BBC was just for Chinese, how they are ravaging the African economies. I think if there is any problem with the Chinese, the best person to complain is an African. And I haven't seen any. And it depends which African you are talking to. You get different views. I heard from my friend from Diaspora, yes. I don't argue with him. It depends, again, which African you say. I live in Africa, I know. I'm not in Diaspora or I'm not anywhere. I go there every year. I know what is happening on the ground. Historically, without wasting much time, Mr. Moderator, you warned us about time. At a time when we were fighting for liberation struggle in Southern Africa, where we were the last to get independence, the Chinese government sided with the liberation movement. The West said no. Even until the last country got independence, South Africa, you saw what happened, the vote that was in the Senate in USA, including the former presidential candidate, John McCain, they voted no to free Nelson Mandela. Nobody made a big deal about it, but the Chinese stood with the Africans. When they blocked the borders for Zambia for export, we couldn't export via Zimbabwe and South Africa because of the governments there. Chinese had to build a railway line from Kapirimposhi to Dar es Salaam to open up a route for us to export. So what wrong is there? What wrong? From a Zambian perspective, actually, I would like to congratulate China because it's brought competition on the financial market, in the financial market, and even amongst the donors themselves. We have where to go, either go this way or go that way. Thank you.
Make a brief comment.
Thank you, Deputy High Commissioner. But the one thing you'll know, Deputy High Commissioner, is that when new competition arrives in town, not everyone likes the new competition.
Okay. Like just to make it, yeah, I think those are two excellent sort of comments. I think indeed, actually, in the I really haven't done a great deal of work on in specific countries, country-based studies. But if you look at the few, particularly the most recent, two recent studies, one is the special issue by China Quarterly, and also the book by Deborah indeed indicated a great variance in terms of the different countries' experience. And also, I think, China's engagement also, there are indeed some quite successful, others are not so, again, depending on specific social and cultural and economic conditions. So I think that is indeed a very good advice on the people who wanted to look at the issue. I think on the second comment on this about the debate, I totally agree with you. That's why I was a bit surprised that it really had, in terms of academic research, it has really become a sort of a field, a subfield of China-African studies. So you see a lot of papers generated out of this. And I think actually, just to comment that in terms of the so-called resource-based industries, actually China is very late in terms of coming into this industry outside China. In fact, in terms of oil fields in Africa, or mining, or mines and so on, most of the the better ones are already taken and owned by, in many cases, owned by the companies in the West. So actually, again, somebody at the Brookings Institution several years ago did a study on the oil, on China's oil activities in Africa, and it found that it's much less compared to the traditional Western countries. So again, I think I think indeed China's activity in Africa in recent years has been increasing, but if you look at it in perspective, if you look at the overall scenario, you will find that it's far less and far less than the traditional donors and traditional industrialized countries.
Right. I think we have time for another couple of rounds. We're going to try to wrap it up about 3:30. So we have two questions here, Madame, and then the gentleman behind you.
Hi, my name is Matilda. I'm a student at University of Ottawa. Just have a few questions and few notes that I came up with. First off, like, so many people have reiterated this already in the room today that, when we talk about Africa, we tend to talk about Africa as if it's one little grain of sand sitting somewhere, which is entirely not the case. I mean, we have different contexts and, different histories and things like that. So we will not go into that now. I'm not here to play the devil's advocate or to, be on one side of the fence and things like that. I guess when it comes to Africa in general, the only thing most African countries have in general is, what I'll call the result of, failed, badly governed, decolonized processes that went on. And that's why most of Africa, African countries find themselves in the situations they do at present. Directly speaking to the speaker, my first question to you would be, when you talk about China's investment in Africa as a continent, not as a particular nation, would you say that most of your investments are minerally based, like resources based? I would like to have, a clear answer on that. And also, when you talk about Africa can shape the direction of, negotiate or shape the direction of its path in terms of commodity and resources, what exactly do you mean by that? For example, I am a Sierra Leonean. And if I were to go into, if this debate was formulated in the sense that we're talking about Europe's involvement in Sierra Leone or Western involvement in Sierra Leone, my question would have been entirely different. But since we're talking about Africa and China, and I also know that China does have some form of engagement with my country, Sierra Leone, I will not go into some of, like I said, the negating situations that China has found itself with Sierra Leone in relation to small arms trade and things like that devastated my country. I will not go into that. But what I will go into at this point is when you talk about real price commodity and the power to generate profits out of China's involvement with within the commodity sector. When I see things like, shrimps and lobster being fished from my waters in Sierra Leone and being packaged with a label that says from China, how is that benefiting Africa as a whole? And how is that benefiting Sierra Leone in particular? My question will then be, who then has the power of the bargaining tool? Because at the end of the day, it's the power of the bargaining tool, and the power of the bargaining tool most of the time are not given to our leaders or to our negotiators, because most often at times our ideas and suggestions are trumped by that of internationals. Thank you.
We'll have the next gentleman, and then I believe we have a question from cyberspace, which will come in later. Sir, please.
Martin Morello is my name. I'm from IDRC. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. My question is a little bit related to an article in The Economist last year. It was entitled "The Rendezvous Dragon," and they cataloged China as an ex-colonialist. And in general, the article was very favored China very well, but they have three criticisms. One was the involvement in Sierra Leone, and the other one was the issue of nationals from China actually going to work in China rather than hiring local people. And part of the article said that Europe and the Western Hemisphere had its chance to do something for Africa for the last 50 years. Now it was the turn of China. And my question to you is, what is China doing in order to lessen the corruption? I know there is in-kind trade in which China provides with construction roads, rail tracks, and infrastructure. And I was wondering whether that's an active part of the model you have in order to reduce corruption. Thank you.
And now, Kevin, will you bring us our question from cyberspace, please?
Certainly. This person is asking for a little precision here. They're interested in knowing which African countries does China invest most in?
Okay, thank you. As you may know, we're being webcast live, and that's how cyberspace knows what we're doing here. Lan, over to you.
I think the comment on Sierra Leone in terms of the African countries are different. I think certainly that's indeed, I think, similar to the previous comments. So I think in terms of in what ways China's involvement actually can get the resource indeed beneficial to the countries such as Sierra Leone. My understanding is that because indeed China's need for resources, and that has indeed pushed up the prices of those minerals, and I think in fact many of the resources in Africa now really can get more revenues. So I think that's certainly one way, and. The second thing now, in terms of China's involvement, I think is that China also has done a great deal of work in infrastructure building in many African countries. And I think that, to a large degree, I think would help to build the foundations of economic development and reduce the cost of shipping things, and particularly like minerals and so on. That, again, I think also pushes for the economic opportunities for those countries related. The second question, I think, is related to why Chinese companies have not hiring sort of the local people. Indeed, I think that this is that we've often seen that many of the complaints of why some of the Chinese companies doing projects in Africa are not hiring the local people. I personally have also talked with some of the management of the Chinese companies in running those construction projects, and they gave me different reasons. But I think most of all, first of all, I think it's related to first of all to the culture in terms of the language. Basically, most of the companies operating in outside China, they only have very limited managers or interpreters that can really speak the local language. And so for them to think about hiring sort of local people and to manage them, it's a tremendous challenge. So that's sort of one thing. The second thing, indeed, is related to the sort of culture and cultural differences. So they find it much harder to sort of work with the local people in terms of following the work, the disciplines that are required in doing some of the work. So they find it relatively easier and also for them less expensive in terms of completing the projects. And the third is indeed, I think they are arguing that they need to, for many of the projects, they need to have, their teams that they've worked along so that they're able to complete these projects in time. And I think also related to what you mentioned, that how China is doing to lessen the corruptions in Africa. I think actually if you see that many of the projects that China has been running, I think this in a way is paradoxically, in fact, those projects that indeed, when a Chinese company get through the bidding process, got the project, and when they do it, and usually they deliver it in time, in terms of time, in terms of quality, I think they can make sure that that's delivered. And I think that's certainly one way, but certainly not the best way. And so I think I totally agree with the overall comment that indeed China need to, particularly those companies that need, if they want to really develop, to work in Africa in the long run, they do need to engage with local communities and to work with local people. But I think that also one has to understand many of these companies themselves have only started to begin to get outside China in recent years. And so I think that capability indeed requires time to change. Now, in terms of which country China has invested the most, I think that has been changing. I think indeed day to day. I think certainly I think the project in the Democratic Republic of Congo is certainly one of the largest projects. So I think that may have been the largest, but I don't have the exact figure here, and that figure also is changing daily.
Thank you very much. Yeah, some of these questions are of long standing. The issue of using Chinese labor for projects in Africa goes back a long time. I remember when I arrived in Uganda in 1989, there was a series of Chinese road repair and maintenance projects, and even back then they used Chinese labor on those projects, and indeed it was a subject of some discussion in the Ugandan press at the time. I think we have one last question and another question from cyberspace, but sir, I think you're first.
首先感谢你今天的演讲，很高兴能够有这个交流的机会哈，谢谢。So my name is Fabien Nervais. I represent a company called Global Advances that's involved in import-export based out of Beijing, and I'm also a graduate student at the University of Ottawa. So I've spent 10 years growing up in China, and my question is regarding China's immigration policy. What I see in China is that a lot of African colleagues and African students sometimes have a lot of difficulty establishing themselves in China. And when I go to Africa, when I visit places like Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, I see a lot of Chinese that are able to settle very easily within Africa. And getting visas is not an issue. And for them to open up businesses and the business communities that flourish in Africa. I was wondering, how far has China come on their immigration policy towards African citizens going to China? Thank you.
And once more, Kevin from IDRC's Communications Division will give us a question or two from cyberspace.
This question comes from a gentleman by the name of Mark Henderson, working for an organization called Research Money, and his question begins with a bit of a preamble. He says, China's involvement in Africa has been described as filling a vacuum created by the reluctance of many Western nations to invest in the continent's future. What can Canada do to participate with China in investment in Africa to build innovative capacity and share in some of the benefits?
Okay, thank you, Kevin. And I'll take one last question here from the gentleman at the microphone, and then I'll close it after that. Sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrew McAllister. I'm a private consultant here in Ottawa. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your extremely interesting presentation. Three quick questions for you. In most Western most African capitals where there's a traditional donor presence, there is a donor coordination mechanism. Some places it's quite tight, some places it's quite loose. I'm wondering whether there might be, I took your point very much that the traditional donors might need to show a little more flexibility in their relationship with their Chinese colleagues in the development assistance field. But I'm wondering whether there's interest on the Chinese side in participating in some of these coordination mechanisms. Now, granted, there's sort of a price of admission to be paid there. And certainly, the principles in the Paris Declaration and other principles around good governance and democratic development, rule of law, and so forth. And I'm wondering, though, which donors generally have to subscribe to before they are, able to participate in these coordination mechanisms. Do you think that there's some scope for encouraging the Chinese aid program along those lines so that they can join into the coordination mechanisms? I'm glad you also made a point about the transparency of data. Frankly, if I may, I don't think it's that tough a problem to disclose the amounts being dispersed in an aid program in a given country. There are guidelines for doing this. The OECD's been working at this for many, many years. I don't think it's that difficult a problem to translate the data into a digestible and easily comprehensible form. So I just make that observation. My second question is, there's rising concern about trade in tropical timber, tropical hardwoods. And much of it is illegal, from what we understand. I'm wondering whether this is an issue in China, or is there concern in China about importation of large quantities of tropical timber being harvested in Africa? And finally, I think that it might help to dispel some of the suspicions around Chinese investment in oil, mining, and the extractive sector generally, if China were to consider looking at membership in the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which I think is a very useful device whereby companies and countries are required to disclose publicly all amounts paid to host governments where they're operating in the extractive sector. Do you detect that there might be some interest in China in looking at membership in the EITI? Thank you.
Okay, let me first, I think, comment on the China's immigration policy. I think, in fact, I think up to now there is any very so clear and consistent immigration policy in China to sort of in a way for people to immigrate to China. I know there are different cities now started to issue so-called green card for the I think that several years ago that China has so-called the green card policy and to have foreigners to get being granted sort of permanent resident. I think, but that's more or less based on sort of city-based. As a sort of national policy, that's still not there yet. But certainly I understand your point that, in fact, there are indeed some African communities in Chinese cities. For example, in the city of Guangzhou, I think there are different estimates, but people are saying that maybe there are over 200,000 people are actually African people are actually living in Guangzhou city, and also in Zhejiang province. So also communities of African people in Yiwu. So I think there are those communities, but I think I don't know what particular sort of visa status they are in, but I think in general I think that has worked out. But certainly I think in the long run, maybe it's time for China to think about a more sort of consistent sort of immigration policy. But I don't think that exists so far. The second question about what Canada and China could do in terms of joining China in Africa, I think that there's probably a lot Canada can do, given that Canada has a lot of, as I mentioned in the last sort of remarks I made, that indeed many of the traditional donors and in Canada included, in fact, have had a lot of experience in Africa and in many in other developing countries, and some with some success and others with some lessons. And I think that actually, as some people have mentioned, China actually in many cases also are making some of the same mistakes. So in fact, I think there could be a lot of sharing of experiences and lessons, and that would probably ultimately benefit all of us. So I think there's probably a lot can be done. In terms of donor coordination mechanism, I think I have indeed had some discussion with, when I was in Washington, D.C. at the World Bank, and discussion with people on that. But I think the problem, I think that in general is that there's a need to for the traditional donors to be, how would I say that, to be, a bit more humble in terms of not, I think, treating other countries as their subordinates, as countries that really should follow them. Their standards are the best, and they have really, it's more of that they have to join in what they have. And so I think that, as I mentioned, that there should be more flexibility, and in thinking about, what is the best for the local people. And I think that sometimes those so-called the coordination mechanism being viewed by the the new donors as a way to really try to create sort of new monopolies for the aid industry. So I think that unless the attitude can be be sort of treating others more like an equal, I think it'd be very hard to see that people are willing to join such mechanisms. I think in terms of I think that certainly you have your views on the data, and I'd be happy to learn from you how to convert the data. But certainly I think that I see the South African teams. They worked hard to try to convert the data, and I've also given my own estimate. But again, I think that there are still indeed some fundamentally incompatibilities in terms of how to interpret the aid. So I think that we can certainly talk more on that. On the trade in tropical forecast, I'm not quite familiar with the issue, but certainly I think I know that for probably 5 or 6 years ago, there was a period of time that indeed China, there was you see from the so-called the market for for decorating households, you see some so-called precious wood and so on. There was a bit of period of time like that, but I don't see that recently. So I don't know whether there's any change of issues like that. For the EITI, again, I'm not so very familiar with it, but certainly I think that if this is an open mechanism and that members can be equal, I think I'm sure that organizations in China would also be interested in it. I think the key again is that there should be every members that or potential members should be should be treated as equal. I think that's probably a very key factor in whether organizations will be willing to join it.
Wow. Thank you very much, Lan. One of the things we try to do here at IDRC through this Speakers of Renown series is to bring important public issues forward, to have prominent speakers address these important issues, and have a variety of viewpoints brought to bear, to question, and to get answers. And I think, as you've seen today, we've been able to land yet another excellent speaker for this series. And also, I think, an excellent audience who's posed some very difficult and probing questions, both the ones here in the room and the ones watching us in cyberspace. So it only remains for me to thank you all for coming. If I can do a pitch for IDRC, this topic that Lan has been talking to us about today is a topic that IDRC has been supporting some research on for quite some time. The African Economic Research Consortium, which is based in Nairobi, is a long-standing partner of IDRC's. And they've been supporting a project called Asian Drivers on looking at the impact of China and India on Africa for some time. So any of you who are interested in this topic, please go to the African Economic Research Consortium website and put in Asian Drivers, and you'll find a whole slew of interesting research papers there. So, Lan, thank you very much for coming. Great pleasure, as always, to have you here. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming, including those out there in cyberspace. Good afternoon.